Yeah, Darian Jenkins is facing 2 counts of first-degree murder after police say he killed his mother and younger brother. They were found dead here in this home behind me. Now the cousin of the mother is speaking to us, trying to figure out how this could have happened.
A mother welcomes her son home after years in prison, only for him to end her life just 6 days later. It's early evening in Wilson, North Carolina, the kind of quiet where you can hear a screen door breathe and a neighbor's TV murmur through thin walls. Then sirens, blue and red, bleed across vinyl siding, washing over a modest home on Snowden Drive as officers step into a scene that will haunt an entire town. A 50-year-old mother, beloved in her church, and her 15-year-old son, a kid who loved music and volunteered behind the camera, found brutally murdered. Neighbors stand in clusters on the sidewalk, whispering names they know by heart, trying to square the gentle faces they've seen at Sunday service with the unimaginable violence inside that house. This wasn't a random intruder, a masked stranger in the night, or a shadow that slipped in from the highway. The suspicion that begins to form is far worse, because it points inward to someone who had every reason to protect them. Just days earlier, that same front door opened to balloons, to breath-held hope, to a second chance. A son, fresh out of prison, stepped back into a world that still remembered his childhood laugh, his mother's prayers, his younger brother's trust. Friends said maybe this time would be different. Family said forgiveness would do the rest. But redemption is a fragile thing. As flashing lights carve the cul-de-sac into a theater of disbelief, officers start a clock they cannot stop. Who called 911? What happened in those final minutes? Why does the returning hero of a homecoming suddenly read like the villain of a tragedy? The story will twist even before it begins, conflicting whispers from next door, a timeline that refuses to sit still, a community that thought it knew the difference between danger and devotion. You'll hear about a release date that came too soon for some and not soon enough for others, about promises made at the kitchen table and fears voiced on the porch, about moments that were dismissed as nothing until nothing turned into everything. Tonight, we're not just walking you through a crime scene, we're retracing a promise that collapsed under its own weight. We'll follow the sirens back to the front step and then further to the days before the homecoming, to the hours after, to a set of choices that will force us to ask if love can blind us to risk and if a second chance can sometimes be the deadliest first step. The betrayal at the center of this story is not a metaphor. It's a wound that divides a family, a church, and a city into before and after. As detectives begin their work, a single terrible question echoes off those quiet Wilson walls, a question we will keep pressing until the truth gives way. How does a celebration of freedom turn into a night of unthinkable horror? Before we go any further, please let me know where you are watching from and share your thoughts about this case. If you are not subscribed, kindly do so. It's a way to support us.
Don't talk, we just sit back and listen. Then make boss moves. She liked to argue, so I sent that bitch to law school. Preach.
The story of Dana Jenkins resonates deeply with anyone who has ever known the quiet strength of a mother's love. In Wilson, North Carolina, Dana was more than just a name in the neighborhood. She was a symbol of resilience and kindness. Friends remembered her as the woman who always had a smile, who never turned away someone in need, and who lived for her children. She worked hard, often sacrificing her comfort just to make sure her family had what they needed. To those around her, Dana wasn't just surviving, she was building hope for her children's future. Among those children was 15-year-old Darren Cox, the kind of teenager every parent dreams of raising. Darren was bright, full of potential, and deeply rooted in his community. At school, his teachers saw a boy who could light up a room with his curiosity. At church, his voice carried through the choir, touching the hearts of everyone in the congregation. He was not only gifted musically, but also carried himself with a warmth and kindness that made people believe he was destined for great things. For Dana, Darren represented everything she had worked so hard to protect. He was her pride, her joy, her anchor. And then there was Wilson itself, a town that prided itself on safety, the kind of place where neighbors still waved to one another across driveways and people left their doors unlocked. It was small, familiar, and tightly knit, a community that carried the belief that tragedy was something that only happened elsewhere. The murder of a beloved mother and her son here would not only shake families, but would shatter the very sense of security the town believed in. But in the shadows of that warm home was a presence that few could ignore. Dana's eldest son, Daron Dante Jenkins. Freshly released from prison, he had just stepped back into the world after serving time. For most families, his return would have been met with caution, perhaps even distance. But Dana welcomed him back, choosing forgiveness over fear. She believed in second chances, and as a mother, her heart refused to give up on her son. Still, there was unease. Whispers lingered in the neighborhood, quiet questions that people dared not voice out loud. Could someone who had spent years behind bars truly walk back into family life as though nothing had changed? Did the scars of prison fade as quickly as a mother's open arms? And that leads us to a question. Would you have welcomed him back home after all those years behind bars? Or would you have kept your distance, fearing the unknown that lingered beneath his smile? Please share your thoughts below.
I'm hurt because I knew he was going to do something. You can just see he was so fidgetive. He was so anxious. He could not stay still. He had that sneakiness about him. You know what I mean? Like a crazy person trying to get ready to do something, like premeditation. He's looking like he just got out of a mental ward, or he's getting ready to do something, or he have done something. Because the look on his face told me that he done something. Because his hand was cut all up, you know. And
Daron's hand.
Yeah, he had the bandage on his hand. I looked over to the side and I was like, why is her car turned this way? She never parks this.
So that was the first indication you thought something's not right.
I did. He's just getting out of prison.
And that was connected to his attacking his mom, you
Yeah,
say?
for beating his mama. She was a very sweet person. Anything she can do for you, she'll do it.
The story of Daron Cox is one that many in Wilson, North Carolina had whispered about for years. His troubled past wasn't exactly a secret. As a teenager, while his peers were focused on sports teams and church events, Daron was slipping further into a darker world. He had a reputation, short temper, reckless choices, and run-ins with the law that kept escalating. What began with petty theft and street fights soon spiraled into more violent offenses. Eventually, those choices caught up with him, and prison became his reality. For years, he lived behind bars, his family on the outside clinging to hope that maybe time and distance would change him. Dana Jenkins, his mother, refused to give up. To her, he was still her child, the little boy she once tucked in at night, the son she prayed for every Sunday at church. She held on to a mother's unwavering belief that he could be redeemed. When word came that Daron would finally be released on March 25, 2025, Dana opened her arms without hesitation. To her, it was a new chapter, a second chance not only for her son, but for their family. She welcomed him home with love, forgiveness, and the belief that the past could be left behind. But even in that moment of reunion, some noticed things that Dana chose not to see. Neighbors recalled seeing Darren just days after his release. His hands were covered in fresh cuts, his demeanor unsettled. One described him as off, like he had just come out of a mental ward. He wasn't the radiant image of a man stepping back into freedom. He was restless, withdrawn, carrying a storm inside him that no one dared to name. Meanwhile, life inside Dana's home continued with its usual rhythm. 15-year-old Darron Cox was thriving. He was known as a bright, energetic student, a talented musician who often played in church services, and a boy whose laughter was contagious. Every evening, Dana made sure dinner was on the table. Every morning, she prayed with her son before school. Their home was a safe haven, a place of warmth, structure, and unwavering faith. But now with Duran back, Dana hoped to stitch him back into that rhythm. She believed the family bond could heal what prison had broken. She told friends she wanted all her children under one roof again. She wanted unity, not division. But in trying to mend one heart, Dana had unknowingly invited danger into her home. Behind the closed doors of that house in Wilson, something wasn't right. Duran was quiet, watching, brooding. He carried himself differently, almost as though freedom was a burden instead of a blessing. What no one could see, what no one dared to imagine, was that the very home Dana had created to protect her children would soon become the setting of their destruction. And just when it seemed like life might begin to settle into something normal, a shadow began to creep in. A decision was forming, a violent urge simmering beneath the surface. But no one, not his forgiving mother, not his hopeful little brother, not even the neighbors who saw the warning signs, could predict the horror about to unfold. What do you think? Can people truly change after prison, or are some risks too great to take when it comes to family? Please comment below.
March 31st, 2025 began like any other spring day in Wilson, North Carolina. The sun was out, children played on porches, neighbors exchanged casual greetings. Nothing suggested the storm about to strike. Dana Jenkins spent the day running errands, chatting with neighbors, and preparing dinner for her family. Her son, Darren, had returned from school, eager to share stories about an upcoming youth music program at church. To everyone outside, it looked like an ordinary family evening, but behind those walls, tension quietly simmered. Duran, just a week out of prison, was restless. Neighbors would later recall seeing him pacing in the yard, his hands bandaged, his face expressionless. Some thought he was simply adjusting to freedom again. Others whispered that something about him seemed off. As night fell, the house grew quiet. No shouting, no cries for help, no commotion that could be heard from the street. Wilson is the kind of town where silence means peace. But inside Dana's home, silence meant something far more dangerous. Hours later, a call went out. Police arrived to find a scene they would never forget. Dana Jenkins, beloved mother, friend, and pillar of her community, was lifeless. Beside her, her teenage son Darren, full of promise and potential, had also been brutally taken. Reports would later suggest the attack was violent, possibly involving a knife, but investigators kept many details close, shielding the community from the worst of it. Neighbors gathered outside, their faces pale, clutching one another in disbelief. How could this happen here? And worse, how could it happen inside a home that once radiated nothing but warmth and safety? The most annoying part? No forced entry, no break-in, no stranger lurking outside. The evil came from within. Someone who should have been family, someone who had just been given another chance. And the question that now haunted everyone was simple. If Duran was the suspect, what could drive a son to destroy the very woman who gave him life and the younger brother who looked up to him? What's the scariest part to you? That it happened, or that it happened inside their own home? Please share your thoughts.
The hours following the discovery of Dana and Darren's bodies were filled with shock, confusion, and silence heavy enough to crush the entire neighborhood. Police swarmed the modest home, carefully marking off the front yard with bright yellow tape. Lights from patrol cars painted the street red and blue, while neighbors stood outside in their pajamas, whispering to one another, each wondering how something so horrific could have happened just a few feet away. At first, investigators treated the case like they would any other violent crime. Was this a random break-in gone wrong? A robbery that spiraled into bloodshed? The house was searched meticulously. Every drawer, every window, every door frame was examined for signs of forced entry. But the findings only deepened the mystery. Nothing was stolen, no valuables were missing, no shattered windows or pried open locks. Everything inside the home looked untouched, except for the brutality left behind. Detectives began piecing together the timeline of March 31st. Dana had been home with Darren for most of the day. No loud arguments were reported, no calls for help, no disturbances. To the neighbors, it had seemed like an ordinary, quiet evening. Yet within those walls, unimaginable violence had taken place. Soon, their attention shifted to one unsettling detail. Daron Stephen Patterson had been released from prison just days earlier. On March 25th, he walked free after serving years behind bars. His mother, Dana, had opened her door to him, forgiving him, giving him what she believed was a second chance at life. But neighbors quickly recalled the strange behavior they had noticed in the days that followed. They spoke of his hands, cut, bandaged, raw. They described his demeanor, restless, agitated, like he just got out of a mental ward, one resident told police. And then came the realization. Daron had been living under the same roof as Dana and Darren in those final days. Police began comparing timelines. Daron's release on the 25th, his mother and brother's deaths on the 31st. It was too close, too coincidental. Investigators examined his movements, who he had spoken to, and where he had gone. Each lead brought them closer to the truth. Inside the home, forensic teams uncovered evidence pointing inward rather than outward. There were no signs of a stranger moving recklessly through the rooms, no defensive barricades at the doors or windows. This wasn't the work of an outsider breaking in. This was the work of someone already inside. Detectives struggled with the weight of that possibility. If Daron was responsible, it meant that Dana's act of forgiveness had led to her death and her younger son's as well. The case quickly became more than just an investigation. It became a devastating story of trust, redemption, and betrayal. Police could see it coming together, but they needed more: witnesses, patterns, forensic proof. And then, as they pieced it all together, the horror crystallized. The killer wasn't a stranger. The killer wasn't a thief. The killer was someone they had loved and welcomed home. If you were Dana, would you have ignored the warning signs or trusted your son no matter what? I want to hear from you.
The investigation leaves little doubt. Every road, every clue, every testimony circles back to one man, Daron Dante Jenkins. Just 6 days. That's all it took after his release from prison for him to walk back into his mother's home and turn it into a crime scene. Police move quickly. On April 1st, barely hours after the shocking discovery, officers track him down. He doesn't resist. He doesn't cry. He doesn't even ask why he's being arrested. Witnesses recall his face, expressionless, cold, as though he were detached from the gravity of what he had done. The charges come swift and heavy. 2 counts of first-degree murder. The law leaves no room for misinterpretation. When he first appears in court, the silence is deafening. The room fills with family, friends, and neighbors who had once watched him grow up. Now they are forced to see him shackled, guarded, and accused of taking the lives of the very people who loved him most. Some reports say he was held without bond. Others mention a staggering $2.5 million bond, a number so high it might as well have been life in a cell before trial even began. But bond wasn't the issue. The community wasn't worried about whether Duran would be released. They were struggling with the question no one wanted to ask aloud. How does a son kill his mother? Neighbors describe the atmosphere as surreal. Just a week earlier, Dana had been welcoming her son home. She had posted pictures online, celebrated his return, and spoken proudly of him as though the world would give him a second chance. Now those same neighbors were placing flowers outside her home, whispering prayers through tears, and shaking their heads at the thought of betrayal so brutal it bordered on unthinkable. Court proceedings bring no relief. Prosecutors paint Duran as a man incapable of remorse, one who carried anger, instability, and a darkness that had followed him even behind prison walls. The defense struggles. What can be said to explain a crime like this? Mental health? Stress? A sudden break? None of it feels sufficient. Reporters note his posture during hearings. He does not look at the crowd. He does not address his family. Sometimes he stares blankly at the table before him as though he's somewhere else entirely. For Dana and Duran's loved ones, the pain is doubled. They bury two family members, yet one coffin is for the dead, and the other is for the living. Duran, alive but forever lost to the prison system. One son in the ground, the other in chains. A family tree cut at the roots. What punishment do you think fits a crime like this? Can justice ever balance the loss? Please share your thoughts below.
What should have been a new beginning turned into an unspeakable ending. A mother's choice to show forgiveness. A son's decision to welcome his brother home. It should have been a second chance. Instead, it became a final chapter. Dana trusted her son back into her life. Darren shared a roof with his brother again. But in less than a week, that trust was betrayed in the most horrific way. 2 lives gone, a family destroyed, a community left asking why, and a question we may never be able to answer. Could anything have stopped this? Or was this tragedy always waiting to happen? Would you have trusted him back into your home, knowing his past? Do you believe Dana had a choice? Or was this heartbreaking ending inevitable? Tell me what you think in the comments, because your voice matters, and maybe by sharing, we can prevent another tragedy like this. If this story moved you, please like this video, share it, and subscribe. Not just for the channel, but for Dana and Darren, to keep their memory alive, to remind us all of the dangers that sometimes live too close to home, and the price of trust given too easily. This wasn't just a crime. It was a family torn apart, and it's a story we must never forget. Thank you for watching, and see you in my next video.